I was 14 on a Friday and in the mill on Monday.
My mother, she was in the mill.
No, my mother worked in the factory. She was a damaged weaver.
My grandmother, she worked in the mill, and my own mother worked in it, and my mother's mother worked in the mill.
My other granny on the other side, she worked in the mill till she was 78.
You didn't have a chance for anything else because your mothers were waiting for your money.
You were a worker, that was all. If you got a wage, you needed it. No matter how little it was, you needed every shilling of it.
It was always in your head, there was nothing else for you. The mill was waiting on you.
There are places in Ulster seemingly remote from the world. But in Belfast, you soon realise that the world is one, and that there can hardly be a port or a country anywhere to which the skill and the goods of Ulster have not penetrated.
The port of Belfast was Ulster's gateway to the world. This city was famous for its industry, its engineers, its great shipyard. But long before Belfast became Titanic Town, it had another name, Linenopolis. It was linen that sparked Belfast's industrial revolution, and it was linen that made Belfast into a city. The flax travelled from field to factory, and in the 19th century, thousands followed the flax. In this rapidly growing city, life revolved around the mills.
We had all these linen mills, particularly in around Belfast, and we had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who worked over the years in all those mills and produced the most beautiful product. And it's not even a blip on the history screen almost. People talk about the shipyards, almost make you sick. You know, this is a landmark for Belfast. But it was women was doing it, you see. And the big difference was that women don't really count, and that's the point about the mill. You went in there, you done your work. Sure, you're only a woman and we're giving you a job, what more do you want? In a sense, the history's never really been recorded of the contribution that women made.
5 o'clock the horn doth blow, 5:30 we all must go. If you be a minute late, old Jack Horn will shut the gate.
I was proud to work in the mill, and I would be proud to be called a millie because it brought in money. It put bread on the table, paid the rent. I worked for William Ross and Company, Clonard Mill, and I was in it for 44 years.
If you're called a millie, you know, yeah, well I was, and here's why. I've brought up 5 kids, 6 kids or whatever, and I'm proud to be a millie.
So early in the morning, so early in the morning, so early in the morning, before the break of day.
People were using it in a derogatory sense, you know, oh, she's only a millie. But in a sense, we were proud to be millies.
There was no cars in the street then. Nearly everybody were going out to work round about the same time, you know. So you may guess how many people were going to Eden Dairy Mill, Muirt's Mill, and the other mills further up. It was lots and lots of women and girls, young girls.
From Leganeel in the north, down the Crumlin and Springfield roads, into the west on the Falls and the streets around the Shankill, in the linen quarter around City Hall, there were hundreds of mills, warehouses, weaving and stitching factories. They drew their workers from every community in the city, and thousands of families depended on them.
These streets, when they had the little 2 up, 2 down houses, would have been alive with women all coming out, all meeting their chums or their friends, arm in arm up the street and gabble, 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 gabble the whole way up. But there was a very strict thing. You had to be in before a certain time or the gateman closed the door. And that was his wee sense of power.
6:05, they closed the gates of the mill.
you wouldn't get in for diamonds.
When you went through a mill gate, you went into a very hard world. But women went up that yard singing. Singing.
So early in the morning, so early in the morning, so early in the morning, before the break of day.
There was the New Northern, there was Craig's,
Blackstaff, Ross's, Kennedy's.
Graves's mill was at the corner of Conway Street on Falls Road.
They all got work nearly beside where they were born and reared.
In these mill communities, daughters followed mothers into the same mills, the same rooms, the same factories, generation after generation.
Well, on Mother's Day, they start at 6 o'clock. You work 9 hours a day. You complain there was nobody listening. My mother was working till she was 75.
Cecilia's mother worked as a spinner in the mills of Leganeel in the 19th century. She was part of a thriving textile industry created by driven men, entrepreneurs who became the founding fathers of Northern Ireland's great linen dynasties.
It was an extraordinary era where people really went from relative poverty and obscurity to becoming fabulously wealthy. And it started with my great times four, my great-great-great-great-grandfather, Thomas Smallholland. And he had a number of sons, of whom I suppose the most prominent was Andrew. And they owned large cotton mills in West Belfast, sort of in the area of York Street, which suffered a very serious fire in 1828. The Lancashire cotton trade was beginning to come up with some fairly stiff competition for them. So instead of rebuilding the mills for cotton, they rebuilt them as linen mills. And they went on to become the largest linen mills in the world.
York Street was a beautiful mill, beautiful mill. That was the first day at work I was in as a cager, and I was only 15 years of age, and it was a nerve, to tell you the truth. But once you got a few days over me, it was all right. The Duff Missus blew the whistle, and you followed her down the path.
York Street's success made many other firms switch to linen. In 1861, civil war in America would have a dramatic effect in Belfast, making York Street and Irish linen major players in a global industry.
The American Civil War disrupted trade networks. It meant that raw cotton couldn't be exported to Lancashire mills. The Lancashire mills were silenced and plunged into a recession. And due to the unavailability of cotton, linen was widely used as a cotton substitute, and the world's markets were introduced to a high-quality product that was inextricably associated with Ulster linen. And as such, the Irish linen would have been used for everything from underwear to towels, and from ship's sails to hose pipes. I mean, it literally was used for absolutely everything, and it was exported to all four corners of the world.
Linen's strength and durability came from the flax plant itself. When the raw flax was brought to the mill, the rough fibres had to be separated and smoothed, combed out over and over again before they were fit to spin. In factories built in Victorian times, this process was laborious, dirty, and dusty. The workers called it the pouse, the fine flax dust that filled the air in rooms where there was no system of dust extraction. It settled on your hair, your clothes, your chest. In the roving and carding rooms, the dust would have killed you.
There's always pouse on your machines. You could write your name on it, and you could clean it at dinner. You could write your name on it again.
The dust was terrible, but you never thought about your chest. Never. There was no masks or anything, nothing like that. You just went in. Everybody was the same, done the job.
I know very few women who went through the mill who didn't either come out half deaf, bad chest, bad lungs. North and West Belfast would have been notorious, and it still is for elderly women particularly who've all chest problems.
I was just married and had a baby boy, and because he was the first baby, like, no, I used to like to get a wee nurse before I went back to work, and I must have been holding him up, put my coat off and put my overall on, and the price was on it, but I never thought nothing of it, and I went back to work, and when I came in that night, my father-in-law had a lump of pice about that much sitting on the mantelpiece. Tony was choking and he didn't know what was wrong with him, and he put his finger down his throat. It had come off my overall when I was holding him up, and he says to me, you know, you might have lost him.
Mother had got me this job in Blackstaff, and Margaret Mulgrew, my friend down the street from me, she started with me. But we hated it and we cried all day. We had started and we were called slip lifters. I went in and I said to my daddy, I don't like in there at all, and Margaret Mulgrew's daddy's not going to let her go back because she doesn't like it, and I don't like it either, and I'm not going back. And my daddy says, do you see that toe? It'll kick your backside all the way down the street, any of your nonsense. So needless to say, the next day, I went off to work and loved every minute of it.
Most young girls started out as duffers, a general term used to describe a number of jobs, before they worked their way up to becoming spinners. Trade unionist James Connolly lived in West Belfast in 1911. He witnessed conditions in the spinning rooms at first hand.
Imagine a room so hot with a moist heat that all girls and women must work in bare feet. Imagine the stifling, suffocating atmosphere. Imagine all the machinery driven at ever-increasing speed in such an inferno.
Suffocating steam was pumped into the spinning rooms to keep the threads moist and prevent breakages. Women worked a 9-hour day in an atmosphere of up to 85% humidity.
It was very warm and you're on your bare feet and you had your waterproof blazer on you and you had your pickers on you because the water was bouncing out and running down your legs onto your feet. And the heat was terrible and the noise was terrible.
She's away with Barney the vampire.
Up to 100 women would have worked in this spinning room, with 2 toilets between them. The flax they worked with passed through scalding hot water to break down its gummy resin. It stank. They had no bathroom, no shower, just a foot bath in the corner of the spinning room.
Everybody knew you worked in the mill because of the smell. And then sometimes, because of that, you were ignored if you went to a dance. Oh, if you went to a dance and it smelled the mill, you were out. You didn't get a partner.
Many women who'd worked in the mill all those years ago would still have that feeling. It was just one of those things, and you couldn't get rid of it because it was in your nose. Even though you changed your clothes, even though you washed, it was in your nose, that smell, and you couldn't get rid of it.
Down here at the window, there was a wee seat. I used to stand up on that. And my boyfriend used to come up the Crumlin Road on his bicycle. And that window looked down Kimberley Street. And he used to stop there. And I used to wave out at him and he waved back at me. And then he got the way down. And my boss used to come down and say, if you don't get down off that window. So I married him and had a wonderful life because he was a gentleman.
Gin, she called me in, she gave me tea out of her wee tin.
The tight-knit communities of North and West Belfast had their mirror image in the mill. Women worked as they lived, alongside their mothers, their sisters, their neighbours, their friends. The space between the machines was just another street. You kept your ends up, minded your family, looked out for the wee woman who stood beside you.
I think you miss the
companionship,
community of the mills, because we all knew we were all in the same boat. You had to work. And
everybody was the same. You know, Catholic and Protestant were the same. You worked together.
Then you had good neighbours too, like with neighbours, not like the neighbours now. It's not hello and close the door. You had neighbours.
If some woman got herself into a bit of debt, we would have had what was called in the mill a whip round, and everybody contributed what they could out of what they had to help that woman, because they knew one day they might be in that position. We had a couple of women, for instance, I can remember, who perhaps had drink problems, not a bit of wonder. And younger women helped them to get through their day and earn their bonus. And you know, when you talk about the Shankill Road worldwide, people immediately think troubles, paramilitarism. That's not the true Shankill, it's not the true Falls, it's not the true Short Strand. There are real people there doing real things, and I doubt if we will ever go back to the richness there was in life when I was a wee girl.
In the early days of Clifton Street Poorhouse, orphan children worked in Robert Joy's mill to help pay for their keep. Today, it's a residential centre. Many of the women who live and work here have their own memories of the linen industry.
My mother was a weaver, and I always wanted to be a weaver, so I followed in her footsteps. The first day that I ever went into it, I'm not joking you, I felt like Roman. I was frightened, dead scared I was. You pushed the lever and the shuttle started flying back and forward, back and forward. At times it miscued. Sometimes you got it right in the eye there, you know what I mean? And then you were wheeled out to the first aid. If it was necessary, then you were taken to the hospital. But apart from that there, now I enjoyed it, I really did. I ended up weaving 12 looms.
Oh, she just pushed it closer. Lily, Gracie, come on, love. Lily, you're first. Any of them ladies that I ever knew that worked in the mill were very, very proud people. Oh, you've just pushed the blue one closer. And I was just took under their wing. And it was like, now help that wee girl, tell that wee girl what to do there. Don't be letting her touch that on her own. And they really mothered you, you know. They would have told me about years ago when they had to go to the mill with no shoes, no socks, no nothing on. I was like, oh my God, how did you do it? Oh, daughter, we had to do it. Oh, lovely.
It was a horrible noise because it's nothing as noisy as the weaving. The worst thunder ever I heard in my life was music compared with what you heard in the weaving factory. I loved the weaving and I loved working with the linen, and another side of the picture I really hated it because it made me deaf.
It was only in the 80s that people became interested in noise, and I can remember myself the first test we done on the noise was 130 decibels, whereas the government ruling in those days was 95.
Woe unto them that worketh and weaveth the flax. These words from the Old Testament were equally true in the 20th century. Injuries were commonplace, accepted by bosses and workers alike as just part of the job.
I can remember we had a big smoothing machine at the bottom of our room, and one particular woman was doing this and was actually put a piece of, I think it was a tray cloth or something, into it to smooth, attempted to catch it at the other end, and her hand went right into the machine. Now, the company had set up a mechanism on that big machine, huge, big thing, had set up a mechanism that if someone's hand touched a certain part, it automatically cut itself off. But the company never seen the value in wiring that up, and her hand went on into the machine.
Whatever the conditions, thousands of women had no other option but the mill. The poet Robert Atkinson described life for a working mother in the 1930s.
I left himself to make the grub and put the children out to school and give the things an odd wee rub. He looked so helpless, the old fool. It'll be 2 years come this day week. Since then the road's been all uphill. We hadn't all our woes to seek, so back I went to the mill. It's queer and odd the turn things take. This last while, with this and that, the daftest things for goodness sake. It'd make you do, I don't know what.
The whole idea, see, of textile employers was that it was pin money. Women were just trying to earn a wee bit extra for Christmas. It's absolute nonsense. And the money that women were earning was vital to keep that family going, because in some instances the men never worked. There was no jobs. So it was all a question of the women become the breadwinners, but they also had to keep a home going.
There was sad cases, there's no doubt, because there was women working, and rightly on in years, like, but then there was younger women working, and some was working in the advanced stage of pregnancy, and they were in the spin room working away. And believe you me, it was some hard work for a woman who was pregnant.
There was none of the government benefits paid to them, you know, for staying off work. I don't know why we're talking days before even family allowance, you know, where children's allowances were granted.
She had to work to the last 2 days of her pregnancy. She had only 2 days to go till we were born, one after the other. My father was very selfish. Oh, he was selfish. I never wished to see him again. No, I don't mourn him because he was too selfish. And he was all, gimme, 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 but no gimme, gimme, gimme.
Lily was just 2 when the First Great War began. Linen was needed for bandages, boot straps, kit bags, tents, uniforms, parachute harness, even aeroplanes. It was said the war was won on Ulster's wings, and by 1918, linen production had reached an all-time high. In the election of 1921, a quarter of Stormont's unionist MPs were linen manufacturers. Like Ulster itself, many of them were conservative and traditional. A Linen Research Association was founded in 1919 to promote research and development, but in an industry grown fat on wartime profit, there was very little impetus for modernisation or change.
And the linen industry ended up supporting a stratum of non-productive relatives, younger sons, and a wider, basically a wider family circle who were not productive in any way. And eventually the linen industry became effectively an industry where you didn't really have to try. If you produced, you sold, and you made money.
Well, I'll tell you what my wage was whenever I went into your factory. 14 and 6 a week. 14 and 6pence.
I remember exactly what I got. It was £2, 8 and 9pence. And when I went home, Mummy gave me 2 shillings for my pocket money.
I think you went to the pictures. That took 1 shilling. And the other shilling, you bought sweeties, dolly mixtures. You bought dolly mixtures with the other shilling. And that was you for the week to Monday morning come. Up 6 o'clock in the morning, get washed and get on your clothes, out to your work, out to your work.
Employers kept wages low, but the post-war problems caused by rising flax prices in Europe and Russia showed just how vulnerable Ulster's linen industry really was.
The manufacturers were not in control of the trade as such. Because it was an export economy, they were very much at the behest of international events. What happened overseas had a direct impact upon production manufacture within Ireland.
The finished product, checked and counter-checked, is now ready to proceed on its journey to the far corners of the world.
In a post-war world, the centre of political and economic power had moved west across the Atlantic. In 1929, a delegation sailed from Belfast to New York to promote Irish linen in the key American markets. They arrived on Black Friday.
In 1929, in the Wall Street crash, there was a major economic depression that followed that. Now, within the linen trade, it was basically thought that this was simply another economic trough out of which the linen industry would emerge and recoup the losses that had been made in a short period.
But by 1934, flax prices had risen by 74%. Mills and factories laid workers off at will, stopping for a day, a week, a month. There were no contracts of employment, no notice given. In the days before Family Alliance, there were hard times in the Hungry 30s for people who depended on linen for their living.
The mills were in short time. That was a hard time. Then we were all paupers then. So we had all to go to the bureau. We had to sign our name. And we got paid for signing our name.
Oh yes, sometimes there's a payoff. But it wasn't enough flax, you know. Oh, well, there's a payoff. You say it's going to be a payoff. Then they got a load of flax. The way you went again. Mm-hmm.
But another war was coming, and as conflict raged across the flax fields of Europe, it was the Ministry of Defence that once again pushed Ulster's mills and factories to full capacity. To cover a single Wellington bomber took 1,000 yards of linen cloth.
History here comes full circle, because much in the way that the American Civil War starved the world of cotton supplies and encouraged the growth of alternative products and producers, so the Second World War starved the world of linen products. But the demand was still there. So in 1940, the New Zealand government gave a grant of £500,000 to kickstart a linen industry of their own. And this pattern was replicated throughout the world. And when hostilities ceased at the end of the Second World War, the Irish manufacturers fully expected to continue exporting. But they found that their customers were now not only self-sufficient in terms of linen manufacturing, but they had emerged as modern, vibrant, dynamic competitors.
In 1952, England crowned a new queen, and the linen for her table was, of course, made in Ulster. Her subjects preferred fashionable, easy-care fabrics like nylon and polyester. People now wanted goods that were cheap, convenient, throwaway. And like the paper tissue, this new trend would wipe out thousands of jobs in the linen industry over the next 20 years.
Times change, fashions change. I mean, I think that was really probably what was sort of the downfall of linen more than any external market forces in other countries. You know, it was the rise of synthetic man-made fibres such as nylon and rayon, I think, that really sounded the death knell for linen. Linen is a high-maintenance material. It needs careful laundering, it needs careful ironing. And the idea of buying a sort of non-crease nylon stretchy fitted sheet to put on your bed into the housewife in the 1960s, I think, would have appeared a very attractive option.
This Belfast shopping centre was once the site of the Grand Central Hotel. In 1961, the directors of York Street met here to decide the fate of their company. They'd lost their markets in South America and Cuba and were being undercut by foreign competitors.
Well, I guess I was the first member of the Mulholland family not to be involved in the linen industry. My grandfather, I think, was persuaded by some outside directors who came into the company in the late 1950s that there was no future for linen, and my father, I think, didn't feel that way. And he had, after all, had given up a successful military career to go into the company, and there he was finding himself, at the age of 45, possibly being thrown on the scrap heap as far as employment was concerned.
So were 1,700 other people. York Street, once the world's largest spinning mill, closed its doors for the last time in May 1961. And as always, others would follow where York Street led. With the linen industry dying on its feet, Northern Ireland's government looked to foreign textile firms for salvation.
I would say, though, that there'll always be a future for pure linen, but it will be perhaps a decreasing share of the total of the linen industry.
The industry had been crumbling for years. From 70s, it just crumbled at a tremendous rate. Every other week you heard about a factory closure.
I can remember the boss sending for me and saying to me, "We'll have to cut your wages." Well, for what reason? Well, the American market is collapsing, we're going to have to do that. I tell you the truth, I didn't understand what he was talking about. All I knew was that where I was getting 1 in threepence for 50 dozen hankies, he was suggesting I should get sixpence. Now, we accepted that. We had no other alternative.
When I was 15 and a half, I worked in Conway Falls Flax from day one. It was a 3-day week, but I think everywhere was a 3-day week in the 70s. But there was one time when we were all talking, and I wasn't sure whether there were Japanese people or Chinese people came in. And one of the older women said, that's us, we're finished. But we couldn't understand what they were talking about. And then she says, we're silly, them people up there in that office, the Kennedys, whoever it was, are stupid because they're telling them as how we're making linen. And they're going to take it out of our hands and we're not going to be here.
In the 1970s, Belfast had more to contend with than the slow death of the linen industry. But even through the worst of the troubles, in the west of the city, mills like Kennedy's, Ross's and the Blackstaff kept on spinning.
There was a real fear at that time that we wouldn't be able to get into work. Now, the fear wasn't necessarily that the troubles was going to stop us. The fear was if we didn't get into work, we wouldn't earn our money. Because women held this community together. And times were tough. I mean, on the factory floor, you would maybe had a Catholic woman whose husband had been interned. And she was maybe sitting beside a Protestant woman. Now, God knows, maybe her mind was saying it's her fault. On the other hand, you had Protestant women who their husband was in the UDM, was being searched and lifted, and a Catholic woman sitting saying, well, they deserve it. That never actually manifested itself on the factory floor, and it's something I've often thought about why. I think it's because there was such a strong friendship, and I think people just wanted to escape from what was happening outside.
But even the safe house of the mill would soon be lost. In a last-ditch effort to save the linen industry and keep jobs in Northern Ireland, the government invested millions in the 1980s. But they were too late. Linen had moved on.
It took more to pay the wages than it did to keep the mill open, so they had to close the mill.
The mill was a way of life. It was almost like a death in the family. And I can remember being very, very aware of that.
Listening to the wee ladies that worked there for years and years before me, this was their life. They've done this all their life, and I never thought it would ever have closed down, like, never.
Linen has been made in this industrial town since the beginning of the 20th century. But this is not Belfast. This is Pärnu, Estonia, one of the Baltic states. This mill is owned and run by a Northern Ireland firm. It produces premium quality linen for the world's top designers. Faced with competition from China and the Middle East, It was either move to where wages and materials made production viable, or shut the business down. It's been half a lifetime since doffer Bernie Adams and spinner Ruby Graham have set foot inside a mill.
Fantastic, isn't it? This is like the Hilton.
Aye.
Really, this is like the Hilton compared to our toilet. A shower room. Hello.
Look at this.
This setup, I just think is unbelievable. They're catering now. To me, they're thinking about the workers. Then they didn't think about the worker.
They have their restroom.
Yeah.
And they have, you know, they can
They have
go in there
restrooms.
and have a microwave and everything in there.
Yeah, and every different department too.
Every different department.
And a smoking room and a chill out room, more or less, and they're all in different departments. And, well, the guy showed us a big bottle of coconut oil that they come in and rub
Just
on their hands
rub it
to
on
keep
their
their hands
hands.
soft.
Keep their hands soft.
As I say, we're lucky we got soap.
Soap and water. We kept our soft.
Much has changed. Conditions for the workers here are far better than they ever were in Belfast's mills and factories. But the making of linen will always need human hands. Bernie and Ruby's may not be as fast as they once were, but they will never forget the skills they learned as young girls.
It's very like what I would have done. This wouldn't have been here, but it's still very like this here. I think I can get a job. I think they'll give me a job, all right.
These women may speak in different languages, but they have more in common than they know. In Estonia, jobs in the linen industry are also vulnerable to market forces. The machines that once drove this Ulster mill have been reconditioned and are waiting for shipment to India, where a new generation of Millies is already making Irish linen.
We'll have a fair wage now. I would say 100, maybe £200 a week wouldn't pay us now. Easy. But that's water below the bridge and live it back. Pure won't.
There is no longer a commercial spinning mill in Northern Ireland. Life in the mill means something very different today. But whatever they become, these buildings will always bear witness to the generations of women who passed through their gates. In 2001, the Northern Ireland Assembly took the linen flower, the wee blue blossom, as a symbol of a common heritage and a shared future.
We always had an orange or green history, but it wasn't in the mill. In the mill we came together as people. We produced the most beautiful stuff. We were worked into the ground and we laughed about it. And we said, that's the way life is. When I was elevated to the peerage in 1999, I was being offered a completely different world. And I remember saying to one of my friends, she rang me up to congratulate me, and I says, if the mill was open, I'd go back tomorrow.